Hello there, this is Instructor Paul from InstructorPaul.com, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to install Windows Server 2016. Now, I've already mounted my ISO to my virtual machine here, and just so you know, anyone can download Windows Server 2016 by just hopping onto Google and searching for Windows Server 2016 download. I'll also include a link to the download in the description of this video. Now, once you download the file, you can choose as an ISO, which is how I prefer to do it. At that point, you'll want to burn it to a DVD or put it on a USB drive or simply mount the ISO to a virtual machine, and that's what I've done here. So what I'm going to do now that I've powered on my computer and it's booted to this installation media, what I'm going to do is click Install Now. Okay, at this point, if you have a license key, you can go ahead and enter that now. I'm just going to say I don't have a product key. I'll click this at the bottom and we'll continue on to the next screen. So now we need to choose standard desktop experience, data center, or data center desktop experience. Now, the primary difference you notice here is we have standard and then desktop experience. The main difference is that if you just choose standard or you just choose data center, you're going to get what's known as server core, which is a command line version of Windows Server. Also, you cannot install as many server roles if you choose the server core edition. So this used to be called server with a GUI. Now it's called desktop experience. So you'll more than likely want to choose the desktop experience. Now, the difference between data center and standard mainly comes down to virtual machines, shielded VMs, and more advanced features. So if you're not planning on running VMs on this server, there's really no reason to choose the data center version. And I have a license for standard, so I'm going to choose standard and I will click next. So now you need to read over these license terms if you want to, or you can be like most of the people, just click accept. Of course, I'm not endorsing that you do that. You should read this, then click next. And at this point, we need to choose whether we want to upgrade or do a custom install. Now, an upgrade only works and it's only viable when you have a previous version of Windows Server installed. So if you have 2012 R2 installed, you could upgrade that to 2016. Now, keep in mind, Microsoft doesn't even recommend that you run upgrades. They recommend that if at all possible, you should run a custom installation or a fresh install because these upgrades just tend not to work. I don't know if you've ever upgraded your Windows 10 computer or Windows 7. If you tried to upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10, I did it. It didn't work very well. I've tried to upgrade servers in the past. I've never had one upgrade work like it was supposed to. I've always had issues later on down the road. So if at all possible, we want to choose a custom install, which means we're going to format the hard drive, erase everything on the server, and do a clean installation. Okay, so now here, what I have here is my drives and my partitions. Now, I don't particularly want these, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Format on this partition, and I'll click OK. I'm going to select the next drive, and I'm going to click Format again, and I'm going to click Delete. And then I'll click drive 0, partition 1, and also click delete. Now that puts it all into one drive, one single partition. Now this will partition out the drives as it needs to be, create the system reserve, just like it's required. We don't have to worry about any of that, but I like to consolidate all of my partitions into one thing, format all of them. That way I'm getting a complete fresh install. So now what I'm going to do is click next, and the installation is going to begin. Now this will take probably anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the speed of your server. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed up this video and we'll come back when we get to the next screen. Okay, so at this point, we need to create the password for our built-in our local administrator account. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Let's type in something that's pretty memorable. This is a pretty important password. If you're allowed to write passwords down, I don't know if you're doing this at work or whatever the case may be. If you're allowed to write down passwords, might be a good idea, or just use something that you know that you'll remember, because if you lose this password, it's going to be very hard to access the system. Although you could, download some password reset tools if you had to. Okay. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is type in that password that I just created, and I'll press enter, and we should be brought to the desktop. Okay, so now the desktop has loaded, and by default, Server Manager has powered on here. So the first thing we're going to do is rename the server, configure the IP settings. So what we'll do here is on the left side, click Local Server. And generally, 9 times out of 10, you're going to rename the computer as step 1. And then sometimes you'll join it to a domain if you already have a domain. Okay, so now what we're going to do is configure the IP address here. So under Ethernet, I'm going to click on IP version 4 address assigned by DHCP and IP version 6 enabled. So this will open up where my Ethernet adapters are. So what I'm going to do is right click on this Ethernet adapter and choose properties. I'm going to uncheck IP version 6. Generally, it's a good practice to do that unless you're using IP version 6. I'll select IP version 4 and I'll choose properties. So I'm going to drag this up here so we can see it a little bit better. What I'm going to do is type in use the following IP address. And I'm going to configure an IP on the subnet of this network, which is 10.0.2, and I'm going to use 25. Now, if I press tab, it'll auto-complete the subnet mask for me. Now, I'm going to go down to the default gateway, and I'm going to type in the IP address of my virtual router, which I set up to 10.0.2.1. If you're on a home network, this will be the home router. If you're on a production network, it's the IP address of the switch that this server is plugged into. So now we'll go down to preferred DNS servers, and we're going to type in the IP address of our DNS server. Again, if you're at a home network, it'll be the same as your gateway. I am not on a home network, so my preferred DNS server is my domain controller, which is set to 10.0.2.10. And as an alternate, I'm going to use Google's DNS servers 8.8.8.8. Easiest DNS server IP address to remember in the world. So I'm going to click OK, and I'll click close, and that is going to resolve those settings. So if I click start and I type in CMD, I can open command prompt, and I can type in a command called ipconfig. Now, ipconfig will output our configuration for our Ethernet adapter, and I can see that it took the IP configuration 10.0.2.25. So what I'm going to do is try and ping my domain controller really quick, 10.0.2.10, and I'm getting a reply from my domain controller. That's good. Now I'm going to do ping google.com, and I hit left control and C to exit out of that command. Now I'm getting a response from Google. So if I hit left control, actually I'll demonstrate it again. If I press the up arrow and enter and then left control and C, it will stop whatever command I'm executing. So I don't have to wait for that to finish. Okay, so we're now connected to the network. So now what I'm going to do is close out of these windows, and we can see under the Ethernet, it's displaying our static IP address. Now what I want to do is I want to rename this computer. So if we click under computer name, we can choose to rename this computer or domain. We'll click change. So I'm just going to rename this to IP for instructor Paul and MS for member server and 01 for the number 01. Now I'm going to change this from workgroup to domain, and my domain is instructorpaul.com. Now if I click OK, what it's going to do is it's going to spin, it's going to reach out, contact that domain. Now it's asking me for domain credentials. So what I'm going to do is say administrator. I'm going to type in the administrator credentials for that domain. So administrator at instructorpaul.com. I want to make sure I specify that so it doesn't try to use the local administrator account. And I'm going to type in the password for that user account. Hopefully I get this right. So I'll click OK here, and it's going to spin for a second. Hopefully it'll say, there we go, welcome to the instructorpaul.com domain. So now if I click OK, I can click OK again, saying we must restart. I'll click close, and I'm going to say restart later. Now we have firewall, we have remote management. 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to enable remote desktop, but don't do this unless you have a specific need to do it. But I'm going to go ahead and say allow remote connections. To enable it, we need to open the firewall ports also. So if we click that blue button right there, listen, right here, this will open the Windows firewall. We can left click on inbound rules, and then right click and choose new rule. And we need to open the port. So we'll go into predefined rather, and we're going to say remote desktop or remote assistance. So here it is, remote desktop. I'll click next, and we're going to say remote desktop. I'm just going to choose all of these. You would really want to be careful with what ports you're opening on your firewall because you don't want to open things you don't need. So just keep that in mind. If you don't have a specific need to open these ports, don't do it. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. I'll hit apply here and click OK. So now I have remote desktop enabled. I click refresh here. This should update. So there we go. I don't need to configure NIC teaming. Most of you guys will not either. Now under here where it says last installed updates, you should always install your updates as soon as you install Windows. So what I would recommend doing is just clicking on this never here and wait for this pop-up, click check for updates. Especially if you're planning on making this a Windows Server Update Services server. A lot of times when you download new versions of Windows Server, like Server 2016, especially right after it's released, there's a lot of bugs and things that need fixed. So it's just a good practice to update your server as soon as you connect it to the internet, okay? Now we have Windows Defender. By default, this is our protection that is enabled. The last thing that I really recommend that you change is IE enhanced security configuration. If we try to browse the internet right now, it is a royal pain to visit any kind of website. So if I go to, let's just say, for example, I'll click OK, use recommended settings here. If I try to go to just msn.com, for example, first thing that comes to my mind, we're going to get all these pop-ups saying content is blocked. You need to whitelist it. So if I click add, I can click add here and then click close, and then we're going to get a bunch of other pop-ups. So I have to add it again, click add, hit close, and you're just going to getting pop-up after pop-up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit this if I can get out of it. There we go. And I'm going to select IE Enhanced Configuration, this on button here, and I'm going to turn it off for administrators. So if I click OK, now you have to close Internet Explorer, reopen it. Now, if I tried to go to msn.com, press enter, the web page loads just like you would want it to load. Okay, that makes your life easier if you're trying to use Internet Explorer to browse the web. All right, so that's basically everything we need to cover. Obviously, I'm going to want to install these Windows updates once they're done, and we'll want to reboot the server to get those updates installed and to join it to the domain. So that's all you need to do to install Windows Server 2016. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe. And feel free to check out my website. I have a lot of other training and courses on Windows Server. Feel free to shoot me a message if you have any questions. I'll see you in the next video.